Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're cutting through a stack of historical documents to get a shortcut to insight.
And our topic is a big one. It's really the ultimate paradox of any world-changing invention.
Exactly. For the last few weeks, we've been celebrating the printing press, as this amazing feat of engineering. We looked at the metal, the ink, all of it.
Gears, the physics.
Right. But today, we are turning the lens completely. We're moving away from the machine and focusing instead on the finances of the man behind it all, Johannes Gutenberg.
What our sources give us is a really harsh, but I think necessary, hook line. It says, the printing press survived, but the man behind it, Johannes Gutenberg, slowly disappeared.
And that's why the story gets so critical for, any modern innovator.
Absolutely.
Right.
We aren't just here to look back at a historical figure. We really need to dissect the mechanics of it. How can a success so massive, something that changed civilization, also ruin the person who created it?
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission is to understand the paperwork, the operational costs, and that slow, grinding process of losing creative control.
And not through failure. That's the key.
Not through failure, but through the overwhelming weight of success. We want to know how the invention became a financial burden so heavy that its own creator couldn't afford to keep it.
When we talk about invention, the story always starts with that flash of genius.
The spark.
The spark. But our sources make it really clear that the moment Gutenberg moved from just thinking about the idea to actually building the infrastructure, everything changed.
The genius was suddenly overshadowed by this huge logistical and financial shadow.
That's it, exactly. We think of the printing press as this breakthrough in, let's say, information technology. But in the 1440s, it was like a massive industrial startup.
And it needed continuous, unprecedented capital.
Right. This wasn't some simple wooden tool he built in a shed. It was a complex factory, and it was all built on secrecy and precision, which required investment that it dwarfed his personal wealth almost immediately.
Can we get specific about those costs? Because it sounds like it was a lot more than just buying some wood and ink.
Oh, much more. The sources point to 3 primary pressures, and they all just scaled up exponentially.
Okay.
The first one, and probably the most crushing, was the material cost. The metal.
Just the raw material.
The raw material. This press wasn't just a prototype. It was meant for full, commercial production. He needed thousands and thousands of standardized pieces of movable type.
All perfectly identical.
Perfectly identical, each cast from specific alloys, lead, tin, antimony, to make sure they were durable and precise. Getting those custom metals in that kind of volume was just fantastically expensive. And it was a continuous drain, not a one-time purchase.
So he couldn't just use, say, wood or a softer metal. The quality he was aiming for demanded these constant high-end commodity purchases.
Exactly. And that leads right into the second major cost, which was labor. You can't produce a Bible without a small army of skilled artisans.
Punch cutters, type founders.
Compositors, pressmen, and they all had to be paid consistently. But the sources highlight this really insidious hidden cost, and that was the price of silence.
The price of silence.
Yeah. This whole thing was so disruptive, so secret, that Gutenberg had to pay his workers, sometimes excessively, not just for their skill, but for their discretion.
So he was paying a secrecy tax on top of their normal wages?
Precisely. The competitive nature of the idea just amplified his financial strain.
Yeah.
He was, in effect, funding a highly paid covert operation.
Wow.
The sources sum it up really starkly. They say, secrecy demanded silence, and silence demanded money.
So the moment the machine started to actually work, the operating costs were already creating this unsustainable financial structure all around it.
Yes. If you look at it through a modern business lens, the product market fit was, it was perfect. The world desperately needed this press. The innovation was sound.
But the capex and the opex
Were far too high for him to bear alone. The machine was running, but it was basically consuming its own creator's resources faster than it could possibly generate returns.
And that is the core conflict, right? The idea itself was demanding a scale of finance that Gutenberg just couldn't meet without outside help.
And the moment he admitted that, the moment he sought that help, that's when the slow, relentless erosion of his control began.
The sources make a really crucial distinction about how he lost that authority. It wasn't like a sudden theft or some single act of betrayal.
Oh, it was gradual. It was a slow creep. The outcome was clear. The press was still standing. The letters still formed words. But the sources are really emphatic on this point. The decisions were no longer his.
And this is where we really need to look closely at the mechanism of that loss because it's so instructive for anyone, dealing with investors or partners today.
It really is.
What made these loans different? I mean, every major venture needs funding. So why did Gutenberg's reliance on money lead specifically to him losing control?
I think the sources really highlight the insidious nature of incremental dilution. He didn't lose control overnight. The source says it happened slowly, one agreement at a time.
Signature at a time.
Right. The difference wasn't just about the interest rate on the loan. It was about the collateral and the conditions that were attached to the money.
Okay, so his financier, Johann Fust.
Johann Fust, yes. He provided necessary cash when things ran dry, and that offered temporary relief. It kept production moving.
So Fust was the lender, but with each new loan, the collateral he was taking wasn't just cash or property, it was pieces of the operation itself.
Exactly. Each signature on those loan documents brought operational, then eventually legal control further and further away from Gutenberg.
So for the first loan, maybe Fist just asked for a lien on the materials, the type, the presses.
Probably something like that. But when the second or third tranche of money was needed, Gutenberg had nothing left to offer but control. So Fust started taking equity. He started demanding veto power over major spending.
And maybe even dictating which books to print.
It's very likely. Favoring projects that guaranteed a quick high return over Gutenberg's maybe more ambitious, longer-term works.
The moment the financier starts dictating the product line, Gutenberg stops being the revolutionary. He starts being, a high-level employee of his own creation?
That's a perfect way to put it. He exchanged creative and operational authority just for the project's survival.
The brilliance was his, but the financial trajectory, the marketing, the supply chain.
All the things that actually guarantee survival in the marketplace, those were ceded. The survival of the project became contingent on finance, not on the imagination of its creator.
This really connects this, 15th century story to the modern context for you, the listener. If you're dealing with early stage funding or VCs, the question becomes, when does seeking necessary funding turn into ceding critical operational control?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because once you give up that veto power on strategy or product, even if your name is still on the patent, the idea just isn't yours in practice anymore.
That's the critical distinction. Fust didn't steal the idea. He simply asserted his financial right to manage the infrastructure that housed the idea, and eventually she foreclosed on it.
The market, or in this case, the financiers, had the final say on the idea's existence just because they could afford to keep the lights on.
And keep the presses rolling. At the end of the day, this whole narrative provides 4 incredibly valuable, almost counterintuitive lessons that apply directly to any innovator today.
Okay, let's pivot to those larger takeaways. If we boil down Gutenberg's fate, what are the 4 non-negotiable principles about innovation and ownership we need to take away from this?
Okay, the first lesson, and this is maybe the hardest one for visionary people to swallow, is that innovation does not guarantee ownership. We confuse the spark of genius with the legal right to control what comes after. Gutenberg invented movable type, sure, but that act of creation was totally separate from the legal and financial mechanisms needed to scale it, protect it, and maintain it.
That's a profound point. You can create the perfect new thing, but if you don't have the funding to defend the patent, source the materials, staff the production line, then you're just the idea person.
And the owner of the infrastructure is the one who ultimately profits.
Exactly.
Which takes us directly to the second principle. Financial power often reshapes creative control.
The money talks.
The money talks. In any venture that needs significant capital, the people writing the big checks ultimately dictate the direction. We see this all the time in Silicon Valley. A founder has the purest vision, but if the VC firm demands a pivot to a more profitable market, the money usually wins.
It's the difference between having the most brilliant blueprint and owning the construction company. If they're paying for the cement and cranes, they decide where the building goes.
It is. The financial contributor holds the veto power. They're prioritizing utility and profit over personal vision, and that is just a cold, hard fact of commercial history.
The system doesn't care who came up with it. It cares who can maximize its use.
Which leads us to the third lesson, and this one really reflects the most painful part of Gutenberg's story.
The survival of an idea does not mean the survival of its creator.
Right. The press lived on. It became this engine of global change, fueling the Renaissance, the Reformation.
The Age of Enlightenment. It was arguably the most successful invention of its century. And yet, Gutenberg's personal life, his financial stability, his well-being, it all suffered immensely.
He was written out of the functional operation of his own success.
Completely. And that's truly tragic. The system celebrated the printed book, the output, but it completely discarded the input, the inventor. The sources treat this with a kind of clinical inevitability.
The system prioritized the functionality of the machine over the welfare of the man.
And that brings us to the final and maybe most crucial realization. Systems remember results, not sacrifices.
That's a powerful, almost brutal summary.
It is. The historical record, the commercial legacy, they all celebrate the outcome, the spread of knowledge, without really registering the immense personal costs borne by the man who made it possible. Gutenberg is remembered as the name on the invention, but the operational history is one where he disappeared so that the press could thrive under stronger financial management.
The world judged the utility of the invention, not the cost to the innovator.
So this whole story, then, is a stark reminder. These revolutionary ideas, once they move beyond the prototype stage, ultimately they have to belong to those who could afford to keep them alive.
And if you can't shoulder that continuous escalating burden of a breakthrough, someone else with deeper pockets will gladly step in and take the reins.
To summarize this whole paradox one last time, Gutenberg's shadow lies not in failure, but in a success so profound, so demanding, that it actually required his removal from control so the invention could fulfill its destiny.
That's it.
So the final takeaway for you, the listener, is this. When you are developing your next big idea, think really deeply about the cost of creating it versus the cost of maintaining it and scaling it.
Our sources show us so clearly that the second cost, that sustained financial burden of logistics, materials, secrecy, is almost always the higher and potentially more destructive hurdle.
And if you want to explore this dynamic more, you can look at modern parallels. Look at Nikola Tesla, who invented alternating current but lost financial control to Westinghouse and JP Morgan.
Or look at software companies where founders are deluded into, insignificance by the third round of VC funding. This pattern is